Hi, and welcome back to Gen Z Bible class. We are continuing on, and I think we're going to finish chapter 8 today. And as I said before, there's some kind of really important things that are dealt with in this part, the second half of chapter 8, that help us to understand some important things when it comes to our Christian worldview about the nature of sin and evil and just, all this kind of stuff. How does that fall into the story of Noah's Ark? Well, we're about to see. And of course, now we're at the point where Noah is getting off the Ark. I mean, this is the big day. This is the day they've been waiting for like 375 days, more than a year. And, just it must have been such an exciting thing. I was talking about how we used to let the cows out of the barn in the spring, and especially the calves, and how crazy they would go. And it must have been a similar feeling for Noah, his family, and just all those animals that finally get to stretch their legs and get out of that ark. So let's begin, and we got as far as verse 14 last time, so we're going to start at verse 15. Read a couple of verses, 2 or 3 verses here to start with. Then God said to Noah, "Come out of the ark, you and your wife, your sons and their wives. Bring out every kind of living creature that is with you, the birds, the animals, and all the creatures that move along the ground, so they can multiply on earth and be fruitful and increase in number on it." Well, one of the first things we notice here, the first few words, is that God said to Noah. So this is God speaking to Noah. And if I'm correct in this, I think the last time God spoke to Noah was when he got on the ark, and he said, okay, now this is the day, it's time for you to get on the ark. He shuts the door behind him. And from that point on, I think we were making this point last time as well, Noah really didn't have any kind of timeline or specific instruction from God, at least not that we know about. Now, last time, the Bible says that God remembered Noah, but it doesn't say he spoke to him. He remembered him, and then that's the day that the ark came to rest. So it wasn't floating around anymore, and they could, feel a little more secure from that point on after 150 days. But God speaks to Noah, and this is, such a very important time in this whole story. And I think it's interesting that it also mentions, he says to Noah, "Come out, you, your wife, and your family." His 3 sons and their wives as well. And I think maybe this is important because it sort of recognizes the importance of the family unit. I mean, these 4 families, if you want to look at it that way, these 4 couples are now going to be responsible for, repopulating the earth. And, just so we can step back a little bit and get a broader view, let's remember, as we were looking at the genealogies and before this, and how we were following the lines of different family members. Of course, Adam and Eve had all kinds of kids. We don't know specifically how many, but they did have a lot of kids, and each one of them would have started a family line. But we also know that all of them, with the exception of one, get wiped out at the time of the flood. So the only line from Adam and Eve that is left at this point is the line of, do you remember? Seth, the line of Seth. And Seth was one of Noah's great-great-grandfathers. And of course, Noah now has 3 sons. So this is who gets off the ark. It's through these 8 people that God carries the human line into the new world. And that's pretty significant. Why God chose 3 sons instead of 12 or 2, or I figure God knows what he's doing. But you do figure that these 8 individuals are carrying all the genetic information from before the flood till afterwards. So it's really something to think about. Some people like to see analogies to spiritual things in these stories, and we've done that a number of times already. Some people will see Noah getting off the ark, Noah and his family getting off the ark, as being parallel to Christ when he came out of the tomb. And I think that was interesting, as we talked about last week, that specific dates that were mentioned here in Genesis could coincide very easily with the actual date of Christ's resurrection. So all this to say that God is a God of order, and we're going to probably be amazed to find out some things when we finally get to heaven and can do, get all the details filled in that we don't know about right now. Well, let's continue on. The next couple of verses, 18 and 19. So Noah came out together with his sons and his wife and his sons' wives, all the animals and all the creatures that move along the ground, and all the birds, everything that moves on land, came out of the ark, one kind after another. So this, it just gets kind of repetitive, like we said last week, that you get these continual mentioning of these lists of everything that was on the ark. So I'm thinking of it, we can use this word manifest. This is like a manifest. Now, a manifest is anytime you get on a boat, and anytime a boat takes off and it's got a lot of people on it, it has to make a list of everyone who's on the boat. And, for obvious reasons, if the boat doesn't make it back to shore, people need to know who were on that boat so they can notify the next of kin, I guess. But that's a manifest. It's a list of everyone who is on the boat. I guess another term we could use would be a bill of lading. A bill of lading is simply a list of all the cargo that would be on the boat. I don't know if you consider the animals cargo or not, but anyway, we get a whole rundown of everything of importance that was on the ark. And, that's what these couple of verses do. They just remind us of who is getting off. And I guess maybe in a roundabout way, it's reminding us that God protected. We had that same list. He very clearly defined everybody that went on the boat. And now we're getting this list of everyone getting off the boat. And fortunately, those lists match each other. So everybody who got on, got off. And, I think that's a testimony to God's faithfulness. And, the animals, and the three different categories of animals are mentioned here that move along the ground. The birds, my favorite thing, again, the birds, and animals that move on the land. I'm not sure what the difference is between an animal that moves along the ground and an animal that moves on the land. But I'm personally not worried about that. The basic thing is they all got off. And another thing that we see in these couple of verses, it uses this phrase, in an orderly fashion. And just like we know that it was not chaotic when these animals were getting on the ark because God directed them, and Noah did not have to go out with a net and try to catch a kangaroo, which I've still got that picture in my mind if he had to do that, how crazy that would look. But in the same way that God brought all the animals on the ark, it seems like now he's guiding them off the ark in an orderly fashion, 2 by 2. So all of the pairs of animals wouldn't lose track of each other, and they would just get off in an orderly fashion so the elephants wouldn't step on the mice, and squish them. But basically, God was in control of all of this, and I think that's the bottom line that we learn here. Well, let's continue on. A couple of more verses. Genesis 8:20 to 21. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking some of all the clean animals and clean birds, he sacrificed burnt offerings on it. And the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma and said in his heart, "Never again will I curse the ground because of humans, even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood. And never again will I destroy all living creatures as I have done." There's actually a lot in these verses to look at. We start out with this idea of Noah building an altar. What's that all about? Well, this is the first time in the Bible that it mentions somebody building an altar. Now, we know that they were making sacrifices, Cain and Abel and that whole story. Whether they built an altar to make those sacrifices, the Bible doesn't say. But this is the first task that Noah is required to do when he gets off the ark, is to build this altar. I mean, he spent 100 years building a boat, so probably building an altar was a lot easier to do and wouldn't have taken as much time. But when we think about him building an altar, I think it implies something, and that is that there's something permanent. We take a bunch of rocks. I'm sure you use big stones and put them all together to make this altar, but this would be like a permanent structure, and that would imply to me that more offerings, more sacrifices would follow. And certainly that does become the case in the whole story of Israel. The sacrificial system, like we said before, was something that was a big part of their worship and what the Lord required of them and what he wanted to see them involved in. Another phrase here, it talks about a burnt offering. What kind of offerings were these? Well, basically you put something on the altar, you build a fire. I guess first you have to put the wood on the altar, and then you have to build a fire and put whatever offering it was, whatever animal it was. And it says here there were animals and birds, clean animals and birds. Those were the only ones that could be offered. And of course we know that's why 7 of the clean animals were brought, because this would be required. So a burnt offering is something that is completely given to God. There's nothing left once you make a burnt offering. And I think that's very significant. But the real thing about this, and maybe this is one of the most important lessons from these couple of verses, is that this was another test of Noah's faith. Because he's taking these precious animals, and I've been thinking in terms of how we look at animals today, and if you end up with like a few hundred of one kind of animal, right away they go on the endangered species list, and they get the special category and special attention because we're trying to keep all our animals alive. Well, every single one of these animals on the ark was on the endangered species list because of their numbers. I mean, for most cases, there were only 2 of each. And, that's kind of a scary thing. But think of how precious those animals must have been in the mind of Noah, knowing that their purpose was to repopulate the earth, and to offer one of them up to God as a sacrifice was a huge act of faith. And then we read this other phrase that when he did that, it was a pleasing aroma to God. You see that in other parts of the Bible, that God was pleased with this particular offering. Of course, Cain and Abel, he was pleased with Abel's offering, and there was something wrong, we don't know what, with Cain's offering. But this was a pleasing aroma to God. And it wasn't because of the value of the animal that pleased God. It was because of the faith in the obedience of Noah. And that's what pleased God. And this is another, I guess you could say, another important thing when we try to understand who God is and what he really values from us. This is a key thing we can add to our Christian worldview, that God values our obedience and our faith. There's another verse later on in the Bible that talks about how God puts this premium on obedience, and it's not the sacrifice itself that's that important. So this is, it's a pleasing aroma to God. And finally, there's even more here, very important stuff. There is this covenant that's mentioned, and God makes this promise: never again will I curse the ground because of humans. So God is making, and we're going to elaborate on this covenant that God is making with Noah. I think we talked about this before. What is a covenant? Well, a covenant is like a contract, like a legal document, and God makes a promise, and what He says He will do. God is not like human beings that can renege on all the promises they make and try to cheat people. God says He's going to do something. He is going to do it, and this is a reassuring promise that He's made. People sometimes will have these really horrendous experiences in their life, and as a result, it plants a fear in their heart that the same thing might happen again, and they develop all these phobias. Well, after this experience of seeing the whole world destroyed, that could have been something that was on Noah's mind. I hope God doesn't do this again. Well, God reassures him that He will never do that again. And the great thing about these covenants is they apply to everyone, not just Noah. They apply to us. They are still in effect. And when God says He will not do that again, that's still valid today. It's been valid for every generation since then. So this covenant is another thing that's going to get embellished a little bit as we go on, but it's just nice to know. And finally, there's this phrase, and I probably shouldn't think of it as humorous, but even from childbirth, I'm going to do this, I'm going to keep my promise, even though these people, what is the word that he uses there? Even though every inclination of the human heart is evil from childhood, that doesn't make me feel very good, but it is actually absolutely true. And this is where we get another perspective on the nature of evil and sin. We use this term original sin, and I think we talked about the fact that Adam was the one that brought sin into the world, and every one of us has been infected with sin, so that when God looks at us, just like He says here, we are inclined towards sin. This is part of our what we call sinful human nature. But the good news is that God is merciful, and at the same time He acknowledges our sin, He also demonstrates His mercy by making these promises to us. But this is something that we see in other places in the Bible. It's a consistent theme in the Bible, how wicked man is. Of course, we got a picture of that back in Genesis 6:5. We can read that just to remember what was going on then. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. That's why God destroyed the earth, because things had gotten so bad before the flood that He had to deal with it in a physical way. Sometimes you're driving along and you got kids in the back and they're fighting with each other, and am I going to have to come back there? Well, this is pretty much what God did. He had to deal with his hand. He had to deal with the evil that was on the earth at that time. But when we make this transition from that evil time to this new world, unfortunately, the nature of sin comes right along with Noah and his family, and that's basically the point that God is making here. And later on in Romans 3:23, this is a verse that everyone should memorize. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. This is a basic premise in the Bible. Nobody is perfect. Only Christ lived a perfect life. And the beginning to your salvation is acknowledging the fact that you have sinned and that I have sinned. So all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We tend to measure sin, and some people say, well, this person here, he's up to here with sin, and I'm down to here, so I feel a lot better about myself. But the problem is that God's not measuring it in any way like that. He's aiming towards perfection. And Whether you're a big sinner or a little sinner, you're still a sinner. And I think that's a very important part of a Christian worldview for us to understand. But, and this, maybe we could consider this the first of two good news verses, good words, because we're getting to the end of our time here today. In Romans 5:8, so this is a great verse and a great promise. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You know, Jesus didn't come to save us until we made ourselves worthy to be saved. And that's the same picture we get here with God dealing with Noah. He understands that Noah still has this human sinful tendency. And Christ knew when he went to the cross that he was dying for sinners like you and like me. So that didn't change God. It didn't change his character of mercy. And I think that's a really key thing for us to understand. But here's our good word to end with today. And what this is actually the last verse in Genesis 8:22. And it's kind of a continuation of this promise. It's like an embellishment on this covenant that God made with Noah. And he's describing, well, the implications of this promise. So Genesis 8:22. And God said he wouldn't destroy the earth. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, you know, these planting cycles that we see, cold and heat, these are the weather cycles that, remain consistent. Summer and winter and the seasons, every year the seasons come, the seasons go, and we can count on God for that. Day and night, sunrise and sunset, there are some things that just never change. And right now, if you knew how to, if you were an astronomer, you'd be able to calculate 10,000 years from now exactly what time the sun is going to rise at a certain day. You just name the day, and you can figure it out because of this promise that God has made. He's holding everything together. And so we don't have to worry about some asteroid, falling out of the sky and destroying the whole earth. God is going to keep this earth going. And, this is a promise that affects us just as it did to Noah. So that we don't have to, sit around chewing our fingernails worrying about whether, the world's going to blow up or not. This covenant that God made with Noah is still in effect today. And he's going to hold things together until the day he comes. And then, just like Noah gets off the ark and steps into a new world, we as well are going to step out of this world, which maybe we could think of it as being like our ark that we're on, and into this new world that God has in store for us. So, well, the whole story of Noah, it has its time of judgment, but it has, I guess you could say, a happy ending, and we've finally gotten to that happy ending. So I hope it's been an encouragement to you. I hope it's been a blessing to you. And also hope that we will see you again next time as we move on into Genesis chapter 9 on Gen Z Bible class.